So Sumi's going to talk about how you're going to face the old culture in the new world.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about culture. And culture is a very important aspect of what we do as project managers, as change agents, and we need to take it very seriously. I'm with EDD right now, but I've only been with the state for about 4 years. And before I came to work for the state, I was in private industry. And so I had an opportunity to see a lot of different cultures. And so I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the project cultures that I've been involved in. I was at one project, and this was back in the .com days, and this was a startup, and they had a very young culture. I mean, I think the average age was like 26, and, they had catered lunches and catered dinners, and they had candy in the, lunch cafeteria that you could just grab. Everybody was roaming around like crazy. They would not sit still to have a meeting. You couldn't have a meeting with these people. You could send them emails, and everybody had their little laptops out, but you couldn't sit them down. It just wasn't their culture. So we had to change our approach. Then I was in a company that was a very technical, very engineering company. And in this company, I was trying to implement agile development and agile project management, which, as we heard at the lunch session, is very much about breaking silos and breaking barriers. Well, this culture in this company was everybody sat in their little offices, and the building in particular had an office with a door for each and every person. Not for every manager, each and every person, every developer, every analyst, everybody had an office with a door that they could close. How am I supposed to break barriers when you can go lock yourself up in your office? I can't even walk by your cubicle and go hi, So that was something I had to work around. So that same thing, couldn't pull them together. I had to go to every person's office on a regular basis, knock on their door, go inside, right? And so you have to be very much aware of the culture that you're implementing or managing your project in. When I came to the state, I've been very fortunate to be at EDD and to implement many of the modernization projects that EDD's had going for the last few years. And one of the things I recognized right off the bat is that we've got a tremendous amount of engaged staff. We talked this morning about engaging our staff. We don't have that problem at EDD. We are so engaged. Everybody wants to be involved. And so we had numerous projects going on. I think at one time I had 14 projects in the portfolio. So everybody was working on something, and everything interacted with each other. And what I missed, because I was used to creating a project team, creating a group of technical team and them working in the organization, maybe building a design. What I missed was at EDD, everybody's on every team. So you've got to pull everybody together. And we were building many different systems, but there was always somebody in the organization that I had no idea was actually a contributor to the technical team, and who had an opinion and who had an approach to the design. Once I finally figured that out, we had these huge meetings. We went through the design, we let them talk, we let them provide their approach. Oftentimes, the approach would go around and around and around through all of the things that the project team had already covered, but we let them talk and we let them provide input, and everybody from all over the organization came to provide input. We ended up exactly where we were when we started, and it may have taken us, 2 or 3 weeks to get there, but everybody felt like they had buy-in. So now I had a system that everybody was getting behind and could implement. But that was something I had to learn, because that was a different culture from all of the other cultures. So from a cultural perspective, you have to be really aware, what am I working in? What is the environment that I'm in? And the other thing I want to say about culture is, as a change agent, we have to be careful that we're not walking into a culture and expecting them to change the way that we want them to work. Respect the old culture. Be aware of it and give it some respect. There's never anything that's 100% good or 100% bad. So the old culture had a need, it served a purpose, and it performed what it needed to perform well because it worked for such a long time. So understand what they did, why they did it, and take the good parts of it and apply them to the new culture, and then bring in the change where you see the gaps or where you see you can support or where the modernization is changing. So, any questions?
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, before we move on to the next phase of the program today, anybody have any sort of wrap-up questions in terms of anything that they've presented to this point? No? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I would just love to hear your thoughts on what you've heard. I mean, I know you have them, and I also know we're like right on time. But I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind just sharing, because these are just pearls of wisdom that are just phenomenal. I think we've experienced similar things, and I think people in the audience have too.
Yeah.
So if you were to wrap it,
I guess the only thing I would wrap into this is change management is not a project. Change management is part of the project. It is not a separate engagement. It is not this stepchild that sits and rides along in parallel to everything else you're doing, right? It is interwoven. It's electricity, right? You flip this project switch on, change management is in the wall, right? It's an inherent part of what you do. And so in order to get to that point, to get to that element where you're not projectizing change management, because once it becomes a project, now it is a competing element to the core project. Okay? It's not congruent to it. It doesn't have, it's its own thing, right? And so by the definition of a project, you now have to manage it through governance. You have to manage it through resource management. You have to manage it as a separate element, right? Now you can contract for it under a separate contract. It doesn't have to be part of the, maybe if you have a prime vendor who's doing work or whatever it may be. That's a contracting issue. That's the mechanics of how do you get resource to do it. But the project itself integrates project management into every step. So your business analysts have to practice it, your project managers have to practice it, your executives have to be on board with it from pre-initiation, and understanding that, the biggest thing that we always hear on the vendor side, right, is I want to modernize my system, but I don't want any of the processes to change, right? I just want new technology so that it's easier. I don't have to do it in assembly or COBOL, or I want to get rid of my AdaBase Natural, or I want to get rid of my VSAM or IDMS, and I want to move into a better environment where I can go and just hire Java or C# developers, and it's just so much easier to get but I don't want to change anything else, right? Well, that is a change management element, because the nature of hiring, one of the vendors that you guys have hired to come in and do the systems that you've done and the history of what you've done, they bring in, solution sets that have automated chunks of the process. So now people's jobs have changed from day one. So if you're going to try to deal with that on the fly, right? Now you're trying to do damage control. You're not doing change management or transformation management. You're doing damage control, because you have people who are tenured staff who are saying, look, I'm a COBOL developer. I'm a database administrator, right? I got 3, 4, 5 years left. I'm not going to go learn a new technology. I'm not going. What are you talking? And moreover, I am a domain expert in this area, right? And now I have to go and learn how to be something. They can't put their heads around that, right? Are they? They don't want to put their heads around that. So all I would advocate is that when you think about change management, don't think of it as this satellite effort. It is integrated into every requirements meeting, every change management meeting, every governance meeting, every stakeholder meeting, every external, internal communication. It is the nature by which you conduct the project. It is the culture of the project, right? Rather than being something that works as a, oh yeah, I have people, I gotta do something with them, all right? I mean, because that's when you start to have the collisions, I would offer, right? So that's my 2 cents around that, so yeah, sure, yeah, yes ma'am.
I have a question. In the situation that you were talking about, a COBOL developer or a DBA having only a few more years,
Yes,
and adaptation of change is difficult over there.
yes.
So how would you approach if you were in that situation?
Well, the thing that is important is that, I've always believed in the practice that you never tell somebody something, okay? You come and you ask for their input, right? So rather than telling you your job is going to change, we're going to do a modernization. How do you see that affecting or rolling out, or what would be your input around that modernization, how things would work, right? And that to me, and I've shared this a little bit this morning, is that to me begins to create and congeal a little bit of that. I'm an owner, and that's been shared by these folks. I'm an owner in this decision. I'm not just a person that's being done to, right? And that goes for both technical individuals, but also business people, right? Because if you have folks that are in the field, working at a field office, and a lot of the steps that they do is now being automated or changed, or their interaction is being changed, right? They're heavily affected. And so you begin with that. Now, you're inherently going to have flat out, bold-faced resistance to that. It's just the nature of it. So the plan begins to shape in terms of the change management, because this is a topic that we could really go down a rabbit hole on, right? But the plan begins to take shape of, do you begin to treat them as this contained SME group who can now help with the business rules extraction process and the data conversion process, right? And what you do in that is now you're capturing their institutional knowledge, right? Which is the largest threat you have in your technical teams and program teams. That when that walks out the door, especially after, not this last administration, I don't want to get too much into that, but, there's a lot of pent up, I'm walking and I'm taking it all with me, right? And understandably, some people feel that way. That you start to capture that in the business rules extraction process, and now you're documenting what's in their melon, right? You've got the content going, and they become these subject matter advisors to the team. You can begin to position them into that, create a transition process to bring in new resources that'll support this new system that you're doing. You don't alienate them. You give them a path for their participation, and maybe they're not this COBOL development unit anymore. Maybe they're the subject matter development unit in some capacity, and you find a way to transition them, right? Because at the end of the day, people have to make a choice. It's, the system is going to change. How is your role going to be in it? Asking what their role, I think, is a vital piece to include them in that process. But secondarily, how do we not alienate this subject matter knowledge, capture it, have them be part of the testing process, have them be part of that business rules extraction process, have them be part of the overall validation component technically. And then that's an example of a path. It's not the path, but just to answer your question. Yeah, I think, yeah. Any other questions?